Currently, the tab we are in is the Project tab. To be able to add functionality to our scene objects, we need to switch to our Scene tab. But first, let's delete the node we created previously by selecting it and then right-click and choose Delete. Now let's click the tab here, labeled SpeedMeter, to switch to our scene logic. Now you'll see that we have two event listener nodes already in the graph. They trigger when the scene is shown or hidden. But what if you want to be able to trigger logic manually by pressing a key on the keyboard, for example? Now let's create a console node, like we did before, except this time we're going to do it a little bit differently. If you right-click the graph background and then start typing console, then hit return, you can quickly add it to the graph. Now let's add another node in the same way by searching for on Keypress. If we click on this node, we will see an attribute called key. Click the drop-down box to see the available Keypress events that we have at our disposal. Let's scroll down and select up. Now if we connect the onKeyPress node to the console node and press play, we can trigger the console message manually by pressing the up key. Now we want to be able to change the value of our speed meter, which means that we need to be able to store the speed value somewhere. In Incari and computer programming in general, these values are stored inside something called a variable, so that they can be accessed and manipulated when needed. To create a variable, let's first go over to the tabs on the left and click the bottom tab. We can then press the plus icon to add a new variable. You will then be prompted to assign a new name for a variable, which we will call speed_value. There is also a drop-down for the type of data that we will be storing. There are quite a few different types to choose from, which may seem intimidating at first. But for this tutorial, we will just be looking at numerical values and text. The main numerical types are float or floating point number, which can have a decimal place, and a int or integer, which is a whole number without a decimal place. There are fundamental differences between these two types, but that's not something that I'll be discussing here. Because in real life, speed is mostly displayed as whole numbers. We will choose int for our purposes, and then press the add button. Now if we click on this variable, we can see it has an attribute called default value. This is where we can set the initial value that the variable will be when the scene starts. To test, let's set this to 40, and then drag it into our graph. We will then be given 4 options: getter, setter, onChange, or onSet. We want to get the value of the variable, so let's select getter. Before we connect this up, I just want to talk about another data type. If we click on the console node, you will see that it says string under data type. This means that the value of this node is a string of characters, hello world in this case. Now let's plug this into our console node. You may notice that the data sockets on the console node changed color. If we click on the node itself, we will see that the data type now says int. If we were to set this back to string and try and reconnect it from the console input to the speed getter, Incari would automatically create a conversion node that attempts to convert a data value from one type to another. We will come back to this later, but for now, let's just do it as before. If we now run this, we will see the pressing up logs, the number 40 to the console. Back in the logic editor, let's add another node called add. Then reconnect the pulses. Click on the node itself, and we can see the data type is set to float. You can see it on the different in and output colors as well. Change the type to int and connect the speed value to the top input socket. Now change its second input to the number 2. Then adjust the last connection, and then press play. Pressing up will now show in the console that the value has been raised by 2. In the next lesson, we will be moving away from the console altogether and looking at how to dynamically change the value of variables and represent values in the text object of our scene.